Those of you who watched my layout tour video probably noticed a glaring shortcoming. The rock cut at the west end of Creed only had one side. Today, I am resolved to fix that. Welcome back to my channel, and as always, thanks to my subscribers. No self-respecting railroad route engineer would lop off the tail end of a rock outcropping just to save a few hundred extra feet of track. Cutting and hauling away thousands of tons of rock is far more expensive than building a longer stretch of level track. I always knew that there would have to be another rocky outcrop on the south side of the tracks. Finally, after a wait of almost 2 years, I decided it was time to build that outcrop. I like to use foam as a base of my scenery for 3 reasons. First, it is inexpensive. Second, it is lightweight. And third, it is easy to cut and shape. I built this basic landform in less than half a day. This particular feature is solid foam, but if you're building larger mountains, you can save a lot of material by leaving a hollow center. The foam is strong enough to support itself and other scenery materials, as long as it is well supported around the edges. I used hot glue to glue the foam in position. If you use hot glue, be sure to use a glue gun with a low temperature setting to avoid melting the foam. You could also use foam-safe glue or even latex adhesive caulk. Once the landform was complete, I started work on the retaining wall. I used these cut stone retaining walls from Woodland Scenics. These walls are cast in hydrocal, so they can easily be cut to size, and you can carve additional detail into the castings using a hobby knife. I used the concrete cap on the 2 tallest wall sections. Then I used the trimmed pieces to form uncapped, shorter walls. I carved stone details into the tops of these uncapped walls, and I cut some simple stone detail on the back sides, which might be visible later. I also carved some cracks and spalling into the concrete caps. Once I had the castings trimmed and detailed, I painted them using pale gray craft paint. I did not seal the hydrocal with primer first. I wanted the various paint layers to soak into the castings. Once the base coat had dried, I painted individual stones using a variety of pale gray and tan colors. This will provide important color variation in the finished wall. When I finished painting individual stones using various colors, the final result looked horrible, as you see here. But by applying multiple washes in different colors, the color variations in the individual stones will be toned down. Here is how my wall castings looked after a black wash, followed by a pale gray wash, followed by a yellow ochre wash, followed by a medium gray wash, followed by a second pale gray wash, and finally followed by a raw umber wash. There is no set formula here. Apply thin washes, slowly building up color until you achieve the color you like. If you like, you could practice on a scrap piece of wall casting until you're confident with this technique. But I wasn't quite finished. I added some gray and concrete washes to the concrete caps, and I dry brushed some vintage white to add some highlights to the stone surfaces. Finally, I used some powdered pastel chalks to add streaks and shading to the walls. Once the walls were finished, I glued them in position, again using hot glue. Now comes the fun part, attaching the rock castings to the basic landform. Unless you're a geologist, you'll want to have reference photographs to use as you build up the rocky outcropping. I'm using rock castings I molded and painted myself, along with a few ready rocks by Woodland Scenics. Almost all of the Woodland Scenics ready rocks are cast using the rubber molds, which are also sold by Woodland Scenics. So if you need a lot of castings, you'll save a bunch of money by buying the molds and casting and painting your own rocks. At this point, Adding the rocks to the landform is sort of like doing a jigsaw puzzle, except it's totally okay to cut the pieces to fit. You do not, and should not, completely cover the landform with rock castings. Think of these castings as the skeleton. We will fill in any gaps with Sculpting to complete the outcropping. Now I start adding the Sculpting, using small spatulas to force it into crevices and to smooth out the final shape. Most of the online instructions for mixing Sculpting specify 1 part water to 2 parts Sculpting. I have found that this only gives you about 5 minutes of working time, so I prefer 3 parts water to 4 parts Sculpting. This gives about 15 minutes of working time. I add small amounts of pure acrylic colors, raw umber and yellow ochre. This tints the Sculpting and eliminates the need for painting before adding scenery. It will take several days, perhaps even a week or more, for the Sculpting to cure. The curing time depends on a number of factors: how wet you made your mixture, how much Sculpting you applied, and the humidity in your train room. As long as the surface feels cool to the touch, there is still significant moisture remaining in your Sculpting. You might be able to start adding scenery as soon as the Sculpting has set, say in an hour or 2. But I always wait for it to cure. I worry that the various glues I use to fix scenery details to the Sculpting will create a moisture barrier, which might keep the Sculpting from curing completely. It's easy to use a similar method to add lower relief landforms. Start by gluing 1 or 2 rock castings at one edge of the hill, and if necessary, gluing a basswood fence along the edge of the layout to act as a barrier for the Sculpting. Next, mix a small batch of Sculpting using 1 cup of Sculpting and about 7 fluid ounces of water. Add just a small amount of color to the mix. Spread the Sculpting behind the rock castings. Then place additional castings on the surface of the still wet Sculpting. Repeat this process until you have achieved the height you want. I find that generally rocks are more exposed on the top and on one side of a hill, and less exposed on the other side, but you should be guided by your reference photos. While I'm waiting for the Sculpting to cure, there are a few things I can do to make progress. I generally take this opportunity to do some touch-up painting on the wall castings and on the rock castings. Once I add scenery to the top of the hill, it will be more difficult to reach into the rock cut to apply scenery along the tracks. So I start by applying the base scenery layer to the surfaces between the retaining walls and the track. Next, I glue a few scattered rocks along the base of the wall. This gives the illusion that erosion continues to affect the rock cut. Then I apply some static grass to the base of the wall. You can control where the static grass will stick by applying your adhesive carefully. Matte medium is an excellent adhesive for this purpose. It spreads easily with a paintbrush, it has a fairly long drying time, and it remains in position. With the static grass in place, I apply the track ballast in the usual manner. I delay applying ballast until this point because I want the ballast to lie on top of the scenery, not the other way around. Once the glue has dried on the ballast, I remove the nails holding the track in position and apply weathering powders to the ballast. Finally, I apply some coarse foam along the track to simulate larger weeds. Now it's time to add scenery to the landform. I'm using the same basic methods and materials I used in my video, Realistic Scenery in a Day. I start by painting white glue, thinned with a little water in places where I want to apply foam turf. This just serves to hold the foam in place. Then I sprinkle a variety of fine turf colors over the glue. It's okay if the foam covers the rocks as well. I will blow that excess foam away, leaving behind just the foam, which covers the white glue. Then I apply isopropyl alcohol, followed by Woodland Scenics Scenery Cement. You should use your preferred adhesive. Once this layer of scenery is dried, I add Woodland Scenic's clump foliage in a variety of colors. Since I am modeling a fairly arid part of the country, I try to glue the foliage in place where water would naturally drain or accumulate. I completed my outcrop scene with these pine trees from Timberline Scenery. Timberline has been out of business for many years now, but these trees from JTT Scenery are excellent as well. They're not cheap. You'll pay a little over $10 for 2 trees, but it takes just a few trees to suggest a much larger pine forest. There is one last detail I want to show you. You may have noticed that I have created, almost by accident, a natural watercourse between the large outcrop and the smaller hill to the west. This watercourse appears to join the dry stream bed on the north side of the track. It would have been necessary for the railroad to make provision for water runoff to flow underneath the right-of-way so as not to impede the southward flow of water. So I decided to model a concrete culvert. This doesn't take much. A length of 60 thousandths by 1/4 inch styrene strip, cut and glued at the proper angles, and painted to look like concrete, forms the ends of the culvert. Painting the roadbed flat black enhances the shadows, giving the illusion that the track crosses over the culvert. And now, as the train passes the town of Creede and approaches the rock cut, we can see a much more complete rock formation, and we can see why the railroad planners chose this route. As a side benefit, I now have a more complete scene divider between my town of Creede and my mine scene. In the description below this video, you'll find links to many of the products and tools I've mentioned. I'd love to read your comments and to respond to your questions. If you want to see more videos of this type, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.